Lowell Votes is a nonpartisan grassroots coalition working to increase voter turnout and civic participation in the city of Lowell, particularly for underserved communities. So the Lowell Votes Coalition is a coalition of 5 organizations: the Cambodian Mutual Assistance Association, the Merrimack Valley Project, Lowell Alliance, Coalition for a Better Acre, and LCC, the Latinx Center for Community Empowerment, as well as many residents and community members who are involved. Lowell Votes started in 2015, and it was purely residents who really wanted to get the vote out. As you may know, there's a really low voting turnout in municipal elections, in particular in Lowell, and these residents wanted to see what they could do about it. So it's purely grassroots. Later, the organizations got involved, but it's always been about resident engagement and residents on the ground. In 2021, we had a 17.9% voter turnout, which means of the registered voters, 17.9 of them actually came out to vote. It was a little over 12,000 votes in total. This is for a city of over 100,000 residents. So it's a pretty low voter turnout. It's a little higher in state elections and presidential elections, but in municipal elections, it's low. Lowell Votes has been, building our capacity to have larger ground coverage year after year. Last year, we knocked on over 12,000 doors, made 20,000 calls to Lowell voters. This year, we're on track to do over 16,000 doors. Each organization in our coalition has a different area that they focus on. For example, Coalition for a Better Acre focuses on the acre. CMAA focuses generally on the highlands. But we canvass everywhere in the city, from like Pawtucketville, South Lowell, Highlands, Lower Highlands, Centerville. We have different subcommittees which are responsible for different aspects of our programming and events. So we have a materials and communications committee, which really focuses on putting together our election guide. That's their big project every year, as well as our other multilingual, nonpartisan voting information. We have an advocacy committee, which focuses on issue-based organizing and advocacy. Lately, we've been focusing a lot on language access in the city and making sure that resources that residents need are available in all languages that are most spoken in Lowell, not just English. And then we also have a youth committee, which right now is working with Lowell High to implement a civics education program at the high school level. According to Lowell Public Schools, over 80 languages are spoken in Lowell. Its numbers are upwards of over 30% of residents are bilingual or English is not their first language. So we have a really high percentage of residents who speak in a language other than English. And the city does have some catching up to do in terms of how they distribute information that's available in more languages other than English. We're actually working really closely with the elections department right now to make sure that voting information is put out in English as well as Portuguese, Spanish, and Khmer. So the first step is really making sure that at the bare minimum that information is available in more languages. Because if folks can't read what we're putting out, it's not helpful regardless of how early we start putting that information out. I think something else is starting a lot earlier. We don't see a lot of voting information coming out until November or late October. And then by then, early voting has already started. We're a couple of weeks away from the election. And it really needs to be going out earlier. And then I think something also is that even Lowell Votes is talking constantly about how do we get information out, not just on social media, but actually in our communities, because not everyone has access to a smartphone or uses social media. So how do you get to, putting information in public spaces like the library, laundromats, places where residents go? We table outside of market baskets and the health center to get people where they're at. And that's part of our also work at the doors and over the phones, is to meet residents where they're at, so that we can get this information out earlier in a way that is accessible for residents. I think there is a lot of trust building that needs to be done. For historical reasons, voter suppression, folks that haven't been involved and have really been excluded from civic life and from voting. And then how do you build relationships with people so that they trust the electoral system and they trust their representatives to come to with issues? That's a huge barrier is, of course, there's that like education piece, which is just getting the information out there. But it's also how do you get people to have faith and like believe in these institutions of voting and in local government that if they vote, their vote will matter. And, that there's concrete things that come out of that. If they call up their city councilor is going to respond to them and going to address their need. So that's a big part of it, and it's a long haul process. It's not going to happen over one conversation. And that's where those continual relationships buildings, showing up year after year at the doors, being in public spaces, being accessible, having those multiple conversations really makes a difference. My favorite part is definitely door knocking. I really enjoy we've been going out on Saturdays, especially in the last month leading up, and knocking on a resident's door and having that moment where you can just connect one-on-one with someone and say, hey, did you know that an election was happening? Do you normally vote? How do you feel about voting? Having those like one-on-one connections is, I think, how you really stay grounded in this work and stay grounded in what's going on in the community. So there's a lot of different options for folks who want to get more involved, whether that's, attending a city council meeting to speak on an issue, whether that's signing up for some door knocking or phone calling to remind residents and voters, when the election is and who's running. Also attending one of our civic workshops or civic engagement workshops. There's a lot of different ways to get involved that kind of meet everyone where they're at comfort-wise. Prior to 2021, City Council and school committee had an at-large system, which means that anyone could be elected from anywhere in the city, which resulted in primarily a group from mostly constituents from Belvedere being elected, and it wasn't the most representative system for folks in other areas of the city. So in 2021, the city decided on a new model, which voters actually voted on, which was a hybrid-based voting system. So right now, you elect 3 at-large city councilors and 8 district city councilors, and 2 school committee at-large and 4 school committee district-based. So those are meant to, when we say districts, another way to look at it is neighborhoods. So unfortunately, Massachusetts does not have same-day voter registration. So that is always something that I'm telling folks to keep in mind is when the last day to register to vote is, because it's often a couple weeks before the election. So in this past election day is November 7th. The last day to register to vote was October 28th. So if folks miss that deadline, then you're kind of out of luck for that election cycle. I always say keep in mind of early voting and deadlines to register to vote by mail. Everyone has the opportunity to do that now. Those are some important dates that come to mind. Yeah. Our candidate training program is earlier in the year of our municipal years. So we did one in 2021 and then another this year in 2023. We also do year-round civic engagement, like the democracy dialogues where folks can join in. And then we also do, year-round tabling and voter education. Outside of election season is really a term that most folks use to describe, the fall of prior to an election, but it's really year-round. Civics is constantly happening during the year. So whether that's sharing what's happening at city council meetings or school committee meetings, there's always stuff to do. So the election day is November 7th. So if you would like to vote by person, polls open at 7 a.m. and go until 8 p.m. So at any point in the day, you can come to vote in person. You can check your polling location at the Secretary of State's website. Generally, you don't need an ID to vote if your registration is active. If your registration is inactive, then they may ask you for an ID, or you can also bring proof of address, like a phone bill, a water bill, anything with your address on it, and you will be allowed to vote. If someone at the polling location says you are not registered to vote, you can still file a provisional ballot, which they will only re-examine in the case of a recount. You can learn more about Lowell Votes at lowellvotes.org and on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Lowell Votes.